First, let's agree that Wayne/Batman is not insane. There's a difference between obsession and insanity. Obsessed the man surely is, but he's in the fullest possession of his mental and moral faculties. Everything with the exception of his friend's welfare is bent to the task he knows he can never accomplish, the elimination of crime. It is this task which imposes meaning on an existence he would otherwise find intolerable. So Batman's a good person. Obviously, he's a father to a bunch of children, most of them being adopted, and he has a bunch of friends from all over the DC universe. Plus, he's a superhero, and his superpower isn't just his mind, it's his compassion. He's motivated by the belief that all people are capable of change and have the capacity for good, that people, even those who can't fly, run at super speed, or create constructs of hard light, can overcome anything. He's also kind of a jerk. It sounds kind of contradictory. He's a loving, caring person, and he has a lot of friends, and even then, he refuses their assistance if he can. And when he does accept help, his habit of trying to take charge all the time, because he needs to be the one in complete control of every situation. He's a perfectionist to the point where he's not only harsh on himself, but also on others. And at times, under extreme circumstances, it's even escalated a ton. Batman is an inherently self-destructive person, and that's one of the reasons why I and others find him so interesting. He's incredibly flawed. Most characters are, even the GOAT. But Batman's flaws, as I just mentioned, tend to be on full display a lot of the time. It's something I've wanted to unpack because I have a lot to say about this character, but by the time I'm done with all this, I'll have probably already thought of more I wish I'd said. Now, obviously, we've seen more light-hearted and friendly depictions of the character, but on the whole, this has kind of just become modern interpretation, especially following the start of the post-Crisis continuity. This is especially the case in the takes on his earlier years as a vigilante. He's angrier, more vengeful, and way in over his head. So where better than to start from there? The story begins not just from the perspective of Bruce, but also Jim Gordon, Lieutenant Gordon at the time. The story alternates between the pair. Bruce is returning to Gotham at 25 after years of staying out of the public eye. Years spent traveling, studying, and most importantly, training for war. And Jim is moving to Gotham for work, having been transferred from the Chicago Police Department. This is still ultimately about Batman, but I'd like to speak on Jim for the very same reasons why he plays such a major role in the comic. He's key to understanding why Bruce forged the moniker of Batman in the first place, because it's through Jim Gordon's eyes that we see firsthand just how crime-ridden Gotham City really is. But I don't mean that in the more straightforward sense. Gotham and crime are synonymous. It's to the point where fans often joke about how terrible it would be to live there. It's a perpetual shithole. The real life reason being obvious. If Batman is to exist forever, then Gotham must forever be a shithole. His war on crime will never end because otherwise there are fewer stories left to tell, meaning less money to be made. But year one presents the reader with an in-universe reason, and it's not the petty thugs. Through the eyes of Jim Gordon, we see the members of the Gotham PD drink on the job, we see them use excessive force, they treat the streets as their stomping grounds, they do as they please, and they can get away with breaking as many laws as they want because the way they see it, they are the law. They're worse than any punk on the street. But as Jim, and by extension the reader, become further acquainted with the city, it becomes evident that even Gotham's so-called finest are but a symptom of a far wider problem, because in truth, they are doing their jobs. It's just that their job isn't to look out for the average folk living in Gotham, and it is definitely not to look out for the underprivileged. Their job is to enforce order in a fundamentally unjust system, one rigged in favor of the corrupt and wealthy elites, the people that make the rules, the true criminals. And those working within the system that take notice of this either succumb to the pressure by becoming another accomplice in the heinous acts they commit, or face a harsh reality check. And Jim falls into the latter category. His intentions are pure, about as by the book as it gets, and he's a badass, but he's ultimately helpless. It takes a powerful force from outside the system to finally cause a disruption to the status quo.
What the hell's going on?
The lights! What happened to the lights?
Ladies, gentlemen, you've eaten well. You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit, but your feast is nearly over. From this moment on, none of you are safe.
And with that, the criminals scurry, being the cowards that they are. They quickly grow superstitious. They're met with a danger unlike anything they've ever seen. And when I say that, I mean it. My guy is breaking into mansions and humiliating people. He's even directly compared to Robin Hood. And I love it. I love examples of stories from the modern age, harkening back to the roots of a lot of superheroes, to when they were intended as the champions of the oppressed, before they quickly later had their stories slammed by conservatives and heavily centered our fear of turning the youth into un-American homosexual delinquents. I am going off on a tangent anyway. Bruce is very shortly hit square in the face with a reminder of his own mortality, a reminder that he's just one man and he can't do it all alone, thus planting the seeds for his long-standing partnership with Jim Gordon, albeit at times strained. Now I think would be a good time to pivot away from Year One and early Batman overall. Even though Bruce's obsessive nature and reckless abandon when it comes to his own physical and mental well-being is often most prominent in his early years as a vigilante, that doesn't mean it hasn't remained a part of him. And seeing as I kind of alluded to it, I feel I should elaborate. Jason Todd, the second Robin, dies, obviously. He tries to do the right thing, but he's misled, he's betrayed, beaten, and loses his life in an explosion. And the Joker becomes the Iranian ambassador. It cannot be overstated just how important the character of Robin is to the Batman mythos, and just how much it played into Batman's success. Robin, though no longer canonically, in the real world does predate Alfred. Robin predates the Joker and almost everybody else. And in universe, Robin is just as important. I've mentioned Commissioner Gordon, but there's always a distance between Bruce and Jim. But Dick, Jason, Tim, and Damian are his sons. In my opinion, taking in a newly orphaned Dick Grayson was easily the most important decision Bruce made since becoming Batman. It forced Bruce to grow up in a way that no lecture from Alfred ever could. He was now responsible for somebody just like him, except lacking the immense privilege that he was born into, and he was forced to truly reevaluate his war on crime. He'd found somebody, about the age he was when he first made that vow, who was potentially on the road to becoming just like him. Bruce had an opportunity to prevent history from repeating itself, and he succeeded in doing so, more or less. Dick Grayson ain't the overly joyful, wholesome cinnamon roll that some perceive him as. He and Bruce have a fair bit in common actually, that's a whole other thing though. Point is, Bruce did the best someone like him could, but that was and is still far from a perfect father. This brings me to Jason Todd. Jason Todd was not on the path to ending up like Bruce. He was on the path to becoming another one of the petty thugs, doomed to someday be taken advantage of by the likes of Two-Face and the Penguin, doomed to have his head pounded in by the big bad Batman. Jason was born and raised in Park Row, or as it's better known, Crime Alley, the very part of town that Thomas and Martha Wayne were gunned down in all those years ago. He was born into nothing. His father was a petty crook who was taken advantage of by Two-Face. His stepmother who raised him was taken from him too early. He was like 12, yet had the gall to steal one of the Batmobile's tires, which actually impressed Bruce, making him laugh. Oh, and he took a swing at Batman more than once. Bruce tried to do right by Jason. He tried to enroll him into a local school for boys that he'd been meaning to start funding. But it then turned out that the staff were not only severely mistreating the boys, but even fostering that same kind of criminal life that kids from the area felt they were limited to. I think the whole ordeal gave Bruce a new perspective. As Batman, he works outside the system, stopping those who try to abuse it. As philanthropist Bruce Wayne, he works to create something better, using his privilege and infinite wealth to improve the lives of those less fortunate. He does what he does for the nobodies, but all that being said, he isn't one of them. Jason was, and like every other Robin, he just happened to be naturally more intelligent and athletic than any regular 12-year-old. So he was the perfect candidate to replace Dick Grayson as Batman's partner. In a lot of ways, Jason was very much the golden child, and upon finally letting his guard down, it quickly became quite clear that he was a total goofball. Unlike Batman and the Robin before him, he was simply a good kid born into bad circumstances, and he didn't have nearly as much baggage as either of them. Fun fact, Jason at one point stopped Bruce from killing the Joker. Jason! My point is that the early demise of the second Robin, the golden child at that, brought out an ugly side of Bruce that we'd never seen before. There's this particular moment in an issue of the New Titans where Dick Grayson, obviously grieving over the loss of his little brother, returns home to pay Bruce a visit, and being two of the most emotionally repressed people on the planet, it very quickly becomes hostile. Dick, as he usually does in rare moments of visible anger, just goes straight for the throat. Then Bruce lashes out, leading into a full-blown rant.
Why did I think I needed a partner? They slow you down. They make you worry about them rather than doing your job. He wouldn't listen. He wanted to do everything his way. He was just like you. In a few years, I would have had to fire him as I did you.
It's brutal. They do not make comics like this anymore. Bruce at this point is a broken man. He's more aggressive, more violent, and a complete asshole. He's kind of becoming what certain goofball red-pilled edgelords want Batman to be. You know the ones who like Batfleck but tune out when he actually develops as a character. They hate the concept of Robin, and they probably think the top G's the real-life Batman. Those first two specifically though, because that pretty much sums it up. He is tough but not brutal. He uses violence willingly and often, but never to excess, and never with pleasure. He does not enjoy it, and he never kills. Let's repeat that for the folks in the balcony. Batman never kills. The trauma which created his obsession also generated in him a reverence for that most basic of values, the sacredness of human life. If he was not consumed with the elimination of crime, he would not be Batman, and if he did not consider human life inviolable, he would not be Batman either. The story kicks off with Batman fighting a literal one-off villain, as in he has a single appearance barring a photograph later on, and he shares a name with 4 other characters, all co-created by Marv Wolfman. He's struggling more than he typically would. Of course, he is the goddamn Batman, so he does win, the villain then falling off a dam and off into comic book limbo. Not to say Batman killed him, because Batman never kills, but it's not like he saved him either. So, kind of concerning regardless, as it was obviously intended to be because a certain character believes the very same. Somebody who's been secretly observing the dynamic duo for years, having deduced their secret identities, but only now deciding to act. And he's 13 years old. Tim Drake. Woo! Hey, I said Robin was important. Tim was there the night the Flying Graysons fell, which must have been a little traumatic. And years later, he saw a recording on the news depicting Batman and Robin fighting the Penguin. There, Robin performed a quadruple somersault, a move that only 3 people in the world were said to be capable of performing. One of those people being Dick Grayson, who Tim saw perform the very same flip at the circus. And instantly it all clicked. The dates lined up, Robin's first ever appearance being not long after the adoption of Bruce Wayne's ward. Mr. Wayne later adopted a second kid, and all of a sudden Robin became 6 or 7 years younger. That was when things made even more sense. Batman's secret identity was Bruce Wayne. Thank God he was the only one with enough free time to figure that out. Jokes aside, a commonality I've noticed about every Robin, excluding the obvious like their color scheme, is their ability to read Bruce like a book. Of course they've been taught to do so with every person they meet, but a big part of the Batman persona is the mystique. He's a dark, almost mythical creature of the night. Criminals never know what he's thinking, but he always knows what they're thinking. Yet that trick simply doesn't seem to work on Robin, even from the very first moment they meet him. They aren't scared of him. Instantaneously, they can see past the cowl and towards the humanity lying underneath. So it makes total sense that they, of all people, would be able to tell when he isn't himself. Tim spots it from a mile away and quickly pieces together what's missing. It's Robin. Dick knows it, but there's no way in hell he's ever gonna go back to being a sidekick. He's all grown up by this point, striking out on his own as the leader of the Titans. But someone has to do it, so it's down to Tim. Bruce and Dick are up against Two-Face. Funny how he keeps being brought up. Anyway, this kid with zero training, no prior experience as an acrobat or anything, rescues both of them. Of course, Bruce automatically attempts to dismiss him, insisting on returning to his early days as a loner. A little harsh considering Tim just saved his life, but also I think it's worth calling Bruce's behavior what it is. Deflection. He's putting up a tough exterior because he's afraid, understandably afraid. Jason Todd wasn't a failure, but what happened to him was Bruce's greatest failure, at least in his eyes. He doesn't want to risk repeating that, but if anybody can break through that hard shell, it's a Robin. And Tim tells him straight up, Batman needs a Robin, no matter what he thinks he wants. I think from here on, Tim would help to ground Bruce in a unique way, easily being the most average of all the Robins. At this point, he eventually becomes as messed up as the rest of them. But this isn't the magical cure for all of Bruce's problems. It doesn't stop the decline of his mental state, just slows it down. And it does all eventually reach a culmination. A lot happens in between though. The bat is broken. In one of their earliest encounters ever, Bane completely rocks Bruce's world and blows his back out. Bruce once again is completely out of his depth, even after years on the job. And he's scared. You could say he'd grown into a sense of security, so steadfast in achieving his impossible goal that he thought himself unstoppable. However, these reminders of mortality remain consistent with Batman, even going all the way into the most recent run on Detective Comics, which is amazing by the way. Also, I'm beginning to notice the irony in saying that when talking about a story that started around 30 years ago, about a character that's hardly aged in almost a century. Anyway, Bruce's injuries are severe, but he has a bit more clarity this time. Or he thinks he does. He's even willing to take a step back and allow John Paul Valley, or better known as Azrael, to fill in for him whilst he recovers. Unfortunately, he places his faith in the wrong person. Tim quickly notices John Paul is reckless and aggressive. He'll go to extremes that Bruce won't, and in Tim's own words, isn't big on Robins. He even creates his very own batsuit, and don't get me wrong, it looks kick-ass, but it lacks the same charm of the traditional look. I don't like when Batman designs stray too far away from the roots of the character. Not to say there shouldn't be room for creativity, but I don't like when Batman looks overly decked out and militaristic. He's a superhero, and he should look like one. Here we have a Batman who makes Bruce look like Batmite. A Batman who has taken the war on crime far too literally. He's what Bruce could become if not kept in check. Not to say Bruce is perfect by this point. Throughout the Night Quest portion of the saga, we see he's still determined as ever to recover, but refuses to actually take the time to do that. He refuses to rest, despite Alfred's pleas. For years, Alfred's done everything in his power to keep him safe, like Thomas and Martha would have wanted. He's felt an obligation to Bruce, but Bruce is doing this to himself, and though Alfred may be like a father to Bruce, technically he is just working for him. He can resign whenever he wants, so he quits. He only eventually agrees to come back after a visit from Dick, which is a whole other thing. But in the meantime, Bruce has to reevaluate. He needs to earn the right to call himself Batman again. He needs to not only heal physically, but more importantly, mentally. And he needs to take back the mantle from John Paul, leading into the Night's End arc, where he does exactly that. The two exchange blows, Bruce encountering multiple close calls and needing Nightwing and Robin to briefly tag in, but even they aren't enough to subdue John Paul, who now sports a red batsuit, one closer resembling what he typically wears as Azrael, his true colors, if you will. He has fully gone off the deep end. The fight starts in the city, but eventually makes its way into Wayne Manor, then the Batcave. The parallels between the two become increasingly clear. John Paul has become obsessed. For him, Batman has become more than a mask he wears, it's become his identity. He refuses to go by any other name. Taking advantage of John Paul's bulky armor, Bruce leads him into a dark and narrow tunnel, forcing him to remove everything except his helmet, which he does, overconfident in his abilities. Now John Paul is the one who believes himself to be unstoppable. Bruce doesn't want to hurt him, but he does defeat him. He exposes John Paul's night vision to the sunlight, temporarily blinding him and forcing him to take off the mask. And upon regaining his sight, he finally comes to his senses. He's literally seen the light. He gets it. Too little, too late, one would think. But Bruce forgives him. By some miracle, even somebody like John Paul isn't too far gone. Bruce literally pulls him out of the darkness. He takes off his mask, he gives John Paul a second chance. He wishes him well, and instead of instantly retreating back to his cold, dark cave, he walks in the sun. But again, Bruce's compassion is no secret. It's been well established. This is still a look at Batman's obsession, and it does not end here. I wasn't really sure where to place this or how to segue into this since it's a Justice League story, just one with Batman at the center, but I think it's worth mentioning. A wedge is driven between the Justice League following the discovery of a list of contingency plans thought up by Batman, just in case the League were to ever go bad. It was loosely adapted for an animated movie in 2012. After his daughter, Talia, sneaks into the Batcave, Ra's al Ghul enacts an attack on the League, exploiting each of their weaknesses using notes from stolen files of Bruce's. One by one, each member of the team goes down, until eventually Bruce, of course, admits to the team that the plans and traps were all his. It's definitely one of my favorite stories, but I also feel it's one of the most misunderstood. Certain fans like to hype Batman up as this god. He has backup plans upon backup plans. He can solo everybody, in theory. And this story's kind of become the catalyst behind a lot of that, which is a shame. While without a doubt one of Batman's greatest displays of intelligence, it also exists to highlight one of his greatest flaws, his habit of keeping others at arm's length, becoming consumed by his work as the Dark Knight detective. It asks the question, does he really have friends? I think the writer of the storyline, Mark Waid, puts it way better than I ever could.
Here's the thing, this is what people don't understand. Batman's sin was to the Justice League was not that he had these plans to counteract each of them. It was that he didn't tell them. Its propensity to keep secrets and not be open, that is it's an Achilles heel sometimes.
And throughout Tower of Babel, we see people call Bruce out for it, such as Alfred and Oracle, and his actions have a negative ripple effect. Word gets out and all of a sudden the Titans have a difficult time trusting Nightwing. Young Justice no longer trusts Robin, and it takes time for them to recover from that. This is where I'd like to pose another question. Bruce or Batman? Which one is genuine? Bruce Wayne or Batman? Answer: Batman. But is it though? Throughout this video, I've been quoting somebody, Denny O'Neil, one of the greatest to ever work on Batman. As a writer, he helped bring new life to the character in the 1970s, returning Batman to his dark and gritty roots.
I thought, this has to be gothic. That's something they have missed since the 40s. It has to have that kind of spooky flavor to it.
But also introducing new aspects into the mythos, aspects that, if somebody hadn't told you, you'd think had always existed. And in doing so, he helped to jumpstart the creation of Batman as we know him today. These are the stories that inspired the likes of Batman the Animated Series. And going further, from 1986 to 2001, he served as an editor. Many of the stories I just mentioned he had a hand in. I think it shows. And that's something I love about post-Crisis Batman up until the 2000s. Mainstream comics are not like a TV show or a series of movies where there's a definitive beginning and end, but there are moments where everything just falls into place. Moments that become staples in a character's history, key turning point in that character's progression. And though some things may never change, like Gotham City being a shithole, or Bruce being an obsessed man on a mission to fulfill an impossible goal, that clearly isn't to say he is without meaningful character growth. And going back to the question, during his time as editor, Denny O'Neil put together what is known as the Bat Bible, a resource to guide new talent that had been brought on to one of the many Bat books of the time. Descriptions on the world the Cape Crusader inhabits, his allies, and of course his character. Here, when referring to the character's double life, O'Neil states that Batman is the real person, describing Bruce Wayne as more of a persona. The notion that Bruce Wayne is the true mask, a shadow of a person that died long ago, has kind of become a huge misconception. Perhaps at one point this was presented as being the case, but on the whole it isn't so binary. Let's look at Superman, the greatest thing ever created. When Kal-El of Krypton, raised in Smallville, finds himself in Metropolis, he's out of his element. As mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, he's nervous and bumbling, awkwardly attempting to fit into regular society, attempting to hide his powers and, by extension, his true self. But as Superman, he is unburdened and free to express his true self. Point being, they're all intrinsically linked. The same logic applies to Batman and Bruce Wayne. You can't have one without the other. As both, he plays up a specific aspect of his personality, but somewhere in the middle lies the true Bruce Wayne. The idea that one is the mask and one is the real person has become outdated, and it beginning to become outdated can even be traced back to some of Denny O'Neil's own work. So this is no shade towards him. But if you ask me the exact moment it became fully cemented, that is in a storyline from shortly after his retirement. Another moment of everything falling into place and coming full circle. In the prior storyline, Bruce Wayne is framed for murder. The victim was a woman by the name of Vesper Fairchild, a former romantic interest of Bruce Wayne. Anybody who truly knows him personally, extending to the reader, knows he would never do such a thing. He wouldn't even murder somebody as evil as the Joker, but looking at it from the perspective of those outside Bruce's very specific inner circle, the likelihood of him committing the crime is very high. In fact, he's being especially irrational. And as I've gone over, if anybody would pick up on this, it's Robin. Tim points it out to Dick, who is in denial. Bruce even escapes from police custody. The public could reasonably assume he's attempting to flee the country. Cut to Batman issue 600, where everything finally bubbles up to the surface. Wayne Manor is off limits, the GCPD keeping a close watch over it. But surely there's no way Bruce Wayne would be stupid enough to return to the scene of the crime, which is why Batman goes instead. As he walks through the manor, he's reminded of Vesper Fairchild and Bruce Wayne's other past loves, Silver St. Cloud, Selina Kyle, all ending the same way. There will always be something more important. The timing will never be right. He's reminded of the day the first boy Wonder left to become a man, but he was still distant. Jason, still distant. He steps down into the Batcave, where he is then confronted by the Bat family. They're concerned, but he's still distant. Batman has been an enemy of the law in the past. He's been broken in the past. But now Bruce Wayne's life is falling apart, so he decides that Bruce Wayne is no longer of any use. That it's a mask he's been wearing since he was a child, echoing that aforementioned mentality, the belief that Bruce Wayne died with Thomas and Martha. He's saying this to Dick of all people, his son, the person he raised. Dick's pissed. Dick lashes out, understandably frustrated, but Batman hardly fights back, refusing to give him any satisfaction, only telling Nightwing to stop calling him Bruce. Things only settle down once Dick stops, realizing he's accidentally shattered the case displaying the old Robin costume, the costume that he and Jason once wore, and Batman leaves. For the next handful of issues going into the fugitive storyline, it's down to the Bat family to clean up the mess and prove Bruce Wayne's innocence, but a sudden reality check arrives in issue 603. Catwoman comes to Batman with a message from Dr. Leslie Tompkins to inform him of a man who'd like to meet him, a man named Gary Sloane. It turns out Sloane is a retired detective. He's in the hospital and he doesn't have long left. He talks about the impact that Batman had on Gotham, how Batman could accomplish far more than any police officer, and how that was one of the reasons for Sloane's retirement. But most importantly, it's revealed that Gary Sloane was assigned to the case on the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne. He promised a young Bruce that he'd find the man who did it, but that was one case he could never solve. He'd like Batman to finish what he started. He feels he owes it to Bruce Wayne, and despite not knowing him personally, doesn't believe Bruce to be a murderer. And he has this speech about how he remembers being there the night Bruce Wayne's innocence was ripped from him. How he remembers looking into Bruce's eyes and just knowing that boy was changed that night, but not into a killer. It's exactly what Batman, or Bruce, needed to hear. The very next issue is an all-time favorite of mine, and a full circle moment. He takes a trip to Gotham's East End, a callback to Year 1. The trip down memory lane then takes him to the Monarch Theatre, and then of course, Crime Alley. There's this really sweet couple of pages where these two kids playing on the sidewalk are almost caught in the crossfire of a police chase. Batman obviously pulls them aside, and I just love how absolutely enamored they are of Batman. They're in absolute awe at the sight of him, and I love his little smile as he reassures them. It's always nice to have a reminder of what superheroes are really about. Tailing the vehicles leads him to Catwoman once again, who had the same idea. The relationship between the Bat and the Cat is a complex one. Selina herself is worthy of multiple character studies. The criminals, led by one of the Joker's former henchmen, have captured a rival criminal, a local mobster. Selina's hesitant to save him, but Bruce, without hesitation, takes multiple bullets for the guy. And once all said and done, Selina even expresses confusion as to why he was willing to take a bullet for a crook like that. He can't quite articulate his reasoning, even if it seemed like such a simple act. Really, the answer ties back to why he came here, to where it all began. As he and Selina part ways, he thinks back to his father, about the kind of man he was. Thomas Wayne was known for his status and the money he was born into. But he was also a doctor, a surgeon, a man who would have done the same thing. The Caped Crusaders' unyielding desire to protect human life was a result of that night in Crime Alley, so that no person would ever have to suffer the same loss he did. But that reverence for human life's sacredness, that was instilled long before, and neither created Batman. Batman was always the product of multiple factors, multiple experiences, all unique to Bruce. And as the sun rises, that's when it all comes together. He realizes that he's been so blind all this time. He thought the real Bruce Wayne was that happy child of memory, but now that everything has been stripped away from him, he realizes that mask is not Bruce, not at all. He realizes that he is Bruce Wayne. He always has been. The rest of the arc continues as one might expect, Bruce reconciling with the Bat family to help bring down the true killer. Now, I think it should go without saying that, of course, going forward, Bruce still isn't without his share of problems. We wouldn't have more decades worth of stories otherwise. And he's still on his never-ending mission. He is and will always be obsessed. But any notion of Bruce Wayne being the mask can easily be disproven. Just by reading a comic from the last few years, there's a distinct difference in the way he interacts with the Bat family. He's far more outwardly affectionate, having firmly embraced his role as a father. I'm not quite sure how to properly conclude this. If I've made anything clear, it's that obsession is such an intrinsic part of the character that it would be literally impossible to cover all bases. For now though, I'll just say Batman is a jerk, but maybe this Bruce Wayne guy ain't so bad.